Coming up, too much wine and cheese for Brooklyn. As the Nets fall in Paris to the Cleveland Cavaliers, we break down the sluggish start, the late charge, and whether or not we learned anything new about the current state in Brooklyn, all coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you'll find Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We're 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by Jace Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jace case, providing you with personal supplies of 5 antibiotics that treat 50-plus infections. Get yours today at jacemedical.com and use promo code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. That's Jace, Jase, medical.com. And Doug, we kick things off with a 111-102 loss for Brooklyn in Paris to the Cleveland Cavaliers in what is now becoming a reoccurring theme, a team that cannot seem to put together 4 quarters of quality basketball.
Yeah, it was looking very grim to start this game, where they have 34 points at halftime, and grim is a nice word. I mean, this was a complete F- in the first half for them, where they were trending toward lowest score of the whole season in the NBA, right? Like, it was like 82 points. So they were well under that projection. Thankfully, a third and fourth quarter sort of storming back made it a game, but little else. And yeah, it just continued. New continent, same problems for the Nets. Really, is where they are right now. Like they go to Paris and look basically a lot like the same team that they were when they left the States. Not like, a trip across the pond should make it that huge of a difference, but a lot of the recurring themes that we've seen with this team, like you said, the inability to sustain, long periods of quality basketball reared its ugly head here. And they just had, they played one good quarter basically. And it was probably because Cleveland took their foot off the gas, honestly. Like it's like, and more than anything else.
As often is the case in games like these, when it feels like it's a big blowout, the leading team always says, all right, can we throttle down? No, we got to keep it out here a little bit longer, so be it. So, you don't want to take away the fact that the team, the Nets, continue to show fight and try to get back into this one. We'll talk about Cam Thomas. We'll talk about Lonnie Walker's performance. But ultimately, the fact that you weren't able to ever get it closer than 8 points at any stretch, and the Donovan Mitchell or Karis LeVert, former Net, just kind of said, oh, my turn. I'll knock down a triple, and we'll go ahead and say night-night. Made it feel like this was not a game the Nets were going to ever come back in, no matter how much energy they showed in the fourth quarter. That being the case, at the top of this one, though, too, as you and I discussed before we were getting in, Donovan Mitchell, basically from tip one, it was Donovan Mitchell, as we all knew, was the best player on the court. Nets had no answers for that defensively, including all the guys that are supposed to be defensive stoppers, didn't matter. And then, as they tried to adjust to that, it became another former Brooklyn Net, Jared Allen, who also the Nets had no answers for throughout the course of the early portion of this game.
Yeah, Mitchell took over. And like when Nets fans want to say, like, they're missing Simmons and injuries, all this stuff, like, remember the Cavs are 21-15 and they've not had Darius Garland and Evan Mobley for long stretches. I mean, teams can win when you don't have all your players, as evidenced by the Cleveland Cavaliers, right? Who look like a really high quality team, even though they're missing 2/5 of the, really important guys that they walked into the season with. Yeah, Mitchell was dominant. They had no answers, no defensive, didn't really seem like they made any real defensive adjustments. They weren't, overly blitzing him, right? Like they weren't leaning into like any sort of a ton of different coverages. It was just kind of very vanilla. I may have to go back and watch it a little bit here to like know exactly what the plan was. But anytime a guy gets off, here's the thing, it kind of doesn't matter. Anytime a guy gets off 30 shots, goes 15 for 30 from the field, gets to the line 13 more times, goes for 45, 12, and 6, like you weren't doing anything.
Kind of doesn't matter what the alleged plan was or the adjustments you were trying to make.
Yeah. Of course not. He totally crushed you. He hit big shot. Even when they were pulling back into the game late, it was 2 Mitchell threes that basically sealed it, right? When you could start to feel yourself as a Nets fan, maybe getting onto the edge of talking yourself into, oh, maybe there could be a comeback. It was Mitchell 3, Mitchell impossible step back 3. And you basically at that point knew the game was totally over. And it highlights again, sort of like sometimes the NBA, there can be differences highlighted in just like star power around who you have. Like the Nets don't have a player like this at all. And when those kinds of players really get going, like he was tonight, and frankly has been a lot of this season, right? He's like carried them a lot. When they get going, you do feel kind of helpless. And the Nets clearly don't have the guy. And it just offers this complete juxtaposition in sort of the players that they have. It's not an excuse for why you lost. It's just sometimes this is what happens in the NBA.
Yeah, I think this is a consistent reminder. This isn't like a groundbreaking theme that we're discussing here. It's just that the Nets do not have one of those guys. And this is why maybe a lot of fans say you should go sacrifice draft capital and go get one of those players if they're available now, even if it doesn't change the aspiration of championship contention, just so that you have a player on your roster that you put the ball into the hands of and you say, yeah, you go get a bucket, you go shut down this rally. Now, I know we're going to go a little bit deeper on Cam Thomas. We can sit here and say he is one of those type of players in the making. But I think the secondary part that you notice across these quarters too is when certain guys go quiet, when Mikal Bridges has another bad night for himself, there isn't anyone to play off of here. It's why you say Jared Allen and how you're able to feed him and he's able to dominate. Even the secondary and third options on the Brooklyn Nets right now, as we've said time and time again, you have this collection of, B minuses, right? High end, middle, second tier kind of players. But none of them, even in that sense, complement one another enough or create enough open spacing on the floor so that you can have these surges with a little more consistency. Someone that can help Cam Thomas really explode as he comes into this game as well. That being the case, we will talk about Cam Thomas, talk about Spencer Dinwiddie coming in under the weather in this game, Jacques Vaughn decisions. And oh, by the way, there was only so much personnel brought to Paris, and you'd be shocked to learn that Giles did not see the court once again. We'll dive into that coming up here in just 1 second.
All right, before we get to that, we'll tell you our friends over at Jace Medical. Look, we come to sports for the escape, try to get away from the crazy realities of real life. Just for a minute, we're going to talk about preparing for real life, which is so important. According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of some of the worst flu season we've seen in over a decade. Very, very scary stuff. I can't imagine more helpless feeling than me or one of my family members, or a kid, obviously, got sick while a supply chain issue kept them from life-saving medication they needed. Thankfully, we're all going to be okay with this because of Jace Medical. The Jace case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial infections, including UTIs, respiratory infections, skin infections, among other things. This stuff could happen to any of us. Visit jacemedical.com. Complete your physician encounter. Be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jacemedical.com. Use the offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. jacemedical.com. Offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. jacemedical.com.
So as we continue the afternoon post game, early evening now at this point, but one thing I don't hate is going over to Paris and having this game start at 2:00 in the afternoon. Like, let's go West Coast style rest of the season. Maybe. I say, even in spite of the loss, let's move Brooklyn to Paris. The Brooklyn Nets playing in Paris, I think, is the better way to go. Also live on YouTube. Obviously, we'll stick around for a little bit when we conclude, as we always do on our post game lives. High level, let's start with Jacques Vaughn here. I wasn't sure what the next phase of this was going to be. But because we've been critical, as everyone has, about his rotations, about being too committed to certain players on the roster, not being willing to play younger guys, when you come into this game, as I said, and you know that it's at least reported that you have Spencer Dinwiddie a little bit under the weather, dealing with an illness. On the one hand, you could say you need to be willing to go someplace different or stick with him throughout this game. Do you feel like at a high level, why start Spencer Dinwiddie? Because now we have to speculate on, was it that he was so sick he couldn't keep going, only played 16 minutes tonight, or that Jacques Vaughn finally is doing something different, and now Spencer Dinwiddie is starting to get buried a little bit in terms of his sample size?
Yeah, if this was just like a one-game one-off, I would say, just we'll chalk it up to him being possibly sick and looking, really, really slow out there, and then that would be it. But, we know he got iced last game in favor of Dennis Smith Jr., game before 33 minutes, 28 minutes before that, 21 before that. Like, the minutes have been all over the place. It's not like he's firm. I wouldn't say he's anywhere close to firmly entrenched in like their rotations. I'm not sure like who is. They've been really mixing and matching things. And in this game, they for sure just sort of stuck with hot hand stuff for the fourth quarter, because what else are you going to do? You're getting blown out. Those guys were scoring. So this one might be a little bit of a blip, but there could be some noise here. Like like in terms of like how they view him as a player, how much you can trust, how much he fits with some of the other guys. We're kind of a while from like really like standout performances from him. I mean, go back to the Pelicans game, 21 minutes, 0 points, right?
Yeah.
Like Houston, 28 minutes, 11 points. He, comes up a little bit here with the Thunder game with 23, but then right back to Portland, 28 minutes, 5 points, 2 points in 16 minutes. It's been really bad for Dinwiddie. I would be not shocked if we saw a starting lineup change, only because it seems to be that this is the trend. You don't close a couple games in a row.
Yeah.
And then you start asking yourself, like, what are we doing here? Right. Yeah. And so it's a shame. I like Dinwiddie as a player in general, but I do feel like this could be some writing on the wall stuff, like coming back. Either we get a Dennis Smith Jr., based on last game, played 23 minutes this game. Maybe it's just Cam Thomas in his place and they just see what they have there. I'm not really sure. I don't know. Is that feel like a good assessment? It's been bad for him though. And maybe today was like a sickness, but he has another game on the log that's not too dissimilar from this one where he wasn't sick. So it's like, I don't know how much you can really lean on that part as being sort of like the reason behind it.
Yeah, I think he falls into the veteran category, right? With Royce O'Neal, with Dorian Finney-Smith. Now, Dorian Finney-Smith has had a clear-cut role. Sometimes we've seen Royce O'Neal off the bench get more or less minutes over the course of it. And to your point, like you and I have come to the defense early in the season. He's playing about 5 less minutes per game over the course of January, going back to December, where he's playing almost 33 minutes a game. So that was consistent throughout the start of the year. Now it's dropped off for Dinwiddie. I think that it also, we said, where'd he come from? Playing in Dallas and playing with Luka. This is a hard spot for a lot of these guys to be playing to their best potential when you don't have a Donovan Mitchell, when you don't have a Luka. So that may just be where we're at now on him. And maybe this is an acknowledgement from Jacques Vaughn that as we're working our way through this, as the Nets have now lost 12 out of their last 15 games, you have to just kind of look yourself in the mirror and say a guy like Dennis Smith Jr., who you brought in this offseason to take a flyer on to see what he could be, you're seeing, is he perfect in every regard for this team? No. But he's definitely a more pure on-ball facilitator point guard and offers you some of that defensive value that you need to look into as well. So I think
and by the way,
to do this.
And by the way, it's juxtaposed with Cam Thomas going out there 35 minutes, 9 for 21, 26 points, right? Gets the line 11 times. He's not going to be ever, at least this point in his career, be a big assist guy. But it's not like Dinwiddie has been this amazing ball distributor either, right? 3, 5, 4, 5 assists over the last 5, right? So it's not like with Dinwiddie, because the knock on Thomas at times has been, okay, good scorer, not much else on the offensive end. Now that's it just is what it is, right? Like he's not a big facilitator. We've seen him make some more passes, but he's mostly just a shot creator. But at the same time, if you're not getting that from Dinwiddie anyway, I actually do start to wonder what the point is, right? And you know what I mean? And by the way, this always seems to happen too, because people seem to stand in one of two corners here. It's like pro Dinwiddie, that group is getting smaller for sure. Yeah. And then you have pro Thomas and with the understanding that those guys actually don't really play that well together, right? Those lineups are atrocious. So then you are kind of forced to choose one. And it's getting harder and harder to choose Dinwiddie. I actually don't even know why you would, at this point, right?
Well, I was going to say that too, right? An expiring $20 million contract for Spencer Dinwiddie, oldest player on the team, not going to be a part of this going forward. Cam Thomas, the youth, the development, everything about it makes it very easy to go in his direction. And just to even further your point, I think it would also feel different, though Spencer Dinwiddie is not known for being a staunch defender. But we sometimes said, well, because Cam Thomas has those liabilities defensively, then you want to stay with a little more length. But the team has just been bad defensively. However, they managed to put it together against Cleveland to slow them down, whether it was them or as we said, Cleveland throttling back. You get some things done here in this game. But at a certain point, if you don't represent a different value outside of Cam Thomas as well, then you diminish that as well, right? This team has been terrible defensively. So why do we care? At this point, you need to start turning into, well, how do we outscore other teams? That's what matters most. And that's what Cam Thomas provides you better, arguably, than anyone else on this team.
Yeah, right. And so there just becomes no case to be made, really, right? It's like, what is the case here? It's like we're not getting high level basketball. They're not closing with him. The stats have been bad. The eye test has been bad. And if you're just not getting a different dynamic, right? Because the hope with Dinwiddie is that you can run pick and roll, you can get downhill at the rim, right? You can be a lob threat. I know people make fun of that, but he still does throw the lob, at times. You can do some of these things. But those just aren't happening here. And I don't know if it's a step slow, if it's just not the way the offense is. I do want to talk about sort of the problems with the offense in the first half too, which I think were a lot of, coaching problems. But in general, yeah, I just don't know what case you make at this point because it's not floor raising. Like she's not raising anyone's floor.
Yeah.
It's not like, maybe he's a slightly better defender or like the veteran leadership. He's not, it's just not working. So at that point, make it Cam Thomas, make it DSJ, just make it someone different. And I really actually do wonder, like, I wonder if we're pretty close to this. I do wonder if like these last couple games, specifically this one, just signal this kind of like, it's just not happening.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a shame because maybe that's just going to completely submarine this trade value, but it feels like that's probably where he is anyway.
But and by the way, that's a microcosm. It's just not happening with Spencer Dinwiddie. It's just not happening with this team, right? Like this team is going in the wrong direction. And here's a groundbreaking information. It's not just Spencer Dinwiddie that is having this team go the wrong way, but you need to make other decisions. You mentioned about wanting to get some in the first half stuff and what wasn't working for this team. Just before we do get there, I want to highlight, because I do want to talk about who was in with this team in Paris, who did not play in this game in particular, as we look ahead to the trade deadline coming out of specifically this game, though. Mikal Bridges this is one of those ones where the box score, where you go back and look at it, and 6-18 and 13 trips to the line, you can tell yourself a different story. 26 points tonight, but this folds into what wasn't working and the coaching issues maybe in the first half. This was not a good start of the game for Mikal Bridges again. This is another. You are not the elite number one player. We know that. It doesn't mean we have to dump him about it, but it's just he cannot take over. He cannot be the ISO guy for you at any stretch. And it's gone off the rails here a little bit. And I'm sure we know there are coaching things that could make this look a little bit better and not as much of a struggle as it has in recent games.
They were just so unprepared. Like the Cleveland Cavaliers came in and switched all those DHO actions that they like to run, like these little like sort of like pistol action DHO stuff that they run to get specifically Bridges into sort of like ISO scoring stuff that really hasn't worked a ton, but that is just what they do. Well, tonight they switched all of it into Jared Allen, and he just ate him alive. Yeah. Like he couldn't do anything. Like he couldn't finish at the rim, couldn't get off the mid range. It was like they said the Cavs had a plan. They were like, we're going to switch those actions. And you're going to get Allen, right? And you're going to get like kind of like mini blitzed. And it was just totally over. He couldn't do a single thing. And it highlights what the Nets looked. They had no way to pivot. Like they had nothing else to do. They stopped doing it a little bit because in the second half, like I said, Cleveland went into like prevent defense mode, right? Because they're like, hey, we're killing these guys. We don't need to go crazy on every switch and just go, all out to the wall here. But in the first half, I mean, that was kind of the story for the first quarter. Go back and watch. Everything got swallowed up. Everything. Like they all the shots, all the looks were bad. He missed them all too, but they were all bad looks also. Like it was just everything was super contested. They went multiple possessions without getting a shot off.
Yeah.
Because they just couldn't even, like they just ran the shot clock out because they didn't know where to go. They would run these actions. They would go nowhere. And then it was like, what now? Well, nothing. And it was just kind of over.
And that's the problem with, as you say, this comeback when the Cleveland throttles off and then Mikal hits some shots and everybody, right? All of a sudden it looks like things are working a little bit better. Well, it's because you're not doing the same things that were causing you frustration or problems. This wasn't a counter punch in terms of what Cleveland wanted to do and what the Nets countered with, what Jacques Vaughn countered this. It was, this is our punch. You have no other adjustments to make. We will dumpster you, and then we'll see if we need to kind of hold you off at the back end of this game. There are, however, interesting notes about when we talk inside this bench. Cam Thomas is included in a part of that, but so is Lonnie Walker here. So is Trendon Watford. So I want to get into the players that came off the bench, the performances that they had, the decisions about when to go to some of them or not, and ultimately why this was a prime example as to why certain rookies should have been with Brooklyn in Paris. We'll get into that in just 1 second.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made so easy. We've been telling you about Prize Picks for a while. That's because Prize Picks just figured daily fantasy out. They took all the fun parts of the game, removed all the annoying and maybe more difficult parts, and just gave you a product that's just super fun, super easy. You can put it up in, you can put your picks in very, very quickly. All you're doing on Prize Picks, you're going more or less on the Prize Picks projections. For NBA, that's points, rebounds, assists, blocks, steals. You combine it with NFL guys, you're going touchdowns, rushing yards, receiving yards, attempts, all the different stuff over there on Prize Picks. You're not trying to wrangle with salaries. You're not going against sharks in the water. It's just you versus the Prize Picks projections. You can win up to 25 times your money on entries that take just a minute or two to put in. All you have to do is go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use that code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports made easy.
All right, so as we wrap up the 111-102 loss in Paris for the Brooklyn Nets at the hands of the Cleveland Cavaliers, losing now, of course, their 12th out of 15 games and only 10 games away from the trade deadline, which is where, for me personally, I said coming into this. Now, it didn't mean the Paris game specifically because you want to reward veteran guys and take everybody with you, et cetera. But I said how this was the prime opportunity to reward a young player in Noah Clowney who's developing and has certainly shown some nice strides relative to where we thought he was coming out of the draft down in the G League. Bring him up. Give him a little bit of run here and see what you have with him. Jalen Wilson, deserving of run. Neither one of them is brought to Paris with this team. I'm very curious to see what happens when they get back. But then on top of which, it was, if not Noah Clowney, obviously it'll be Giles. Won't that be the obvious pivot or the small ball that we discussed? No Giles in this game. So I know this is like a little bit off topic. Why is he on this team? Like, why do you have him occupying a roster spot if there's never an avenue to when you're going to utilize him? I like they went to Trendon Watford. I like what Lonnie Walker gave you tonight. But at some point here, the decision-making about which players you're utilizing and getting some sample sizes on these guys, again, we're 10 games away from the trade deadline. We're less than a month away. I just don't know organizationally how they plan on knowing what they're going to pivot to, shy of saying, if we trade, if we don't trade, we'll figure it out on the fly, which has not really worked well for them to this point.
Yeah, I think the young guy thing is more just like they're in Long Island, they're on the 2As, and it's like, I don't think that's anything more into it. Now, coming back, I'm really hoping, I mean, Clowney's been really playing well in Long Island. He's up to 39% from three. I hope, and maybe we can talk about this like on, early next week as we see how things unfold. But because they are going to have a few days off now coming back. But we talked about this last episode with Giles. It's like, hey, if not now, then when? The answer is never. Right? I don't really. It's fine. You don't have to play the guy. There's you're not contractually obligated to play him. I'm just not sure what the roster spot is for at this point, right? And that's like more than anything else. Now, Clowney. The hope here is that the progression can kind of look better, and I think if G League's not a great proxy for this because the competition is just so much less than it is the NBA, so you really shouldn't use too much. But even just watching some of the stuff that he's been doing, it does look considerably more comfortable. So hoping that we see him there, and again, he's going to be part of this group that hopefully, actually, I don't know if he's going to be. The hope is he's going to be part of this group, that this bench group that again continues to be like sort of their saving grace, right? Like this is another game where it's really just the Lonnie Walkers and Cam Thomases and guys like this of the world that are able to beat up on other teams' second units a little bit is like the only reason the Nets, and we talked about this early in the season. It was like a big reason the Nets even were above water early on was the bench was so great. And it's just still now, like the bench that now the starting lineup's so bad that like even great bench play can't make it up. And so they're so pot stuck here. I'm not even sure. And I really don't know, like if moving some of those guys, like starting Lonnie Walker and Cam Thomas, I don't think that would make some huge difference. It's the fact that like they just have some rotation guys that can beat up on second units. I don't think moving them to the starting lineup is necessarily like the answer because I think it would just look worse. Right. But this has been a recurring theme of the season. It's just not doing enough. At some point, you just can't do more. And that's kind of where they are now.
And that's, you get Lonnie Walker playing 25 minutes. Obviously, Thomas, in spite of coming off the bench, plays 35 for obvious reasons with Dinwiddie, whether illness or otherwise, only 16 minutes for him. But this did kind of represent, now I know it's a blowout game, and so there's no guarantee that this is any type of carryover in this, but this is kind of more in line with what I want to see, at least personally. Whoever's on your bench, you should be going, and even Dennis Smith Jr. counts in this category. Lonnie Walker counts in this category. 25 years or younger, could be a part of the team next year if you decide to bring them back. They need to be getting consistent run. They need to be getting closer to 20 minutes than to 10 minutes. And if it comes at the cost of some of your veteran players, again, tonight being 14 minutes for Dorian Finney-Smith, well, that's just a reality check. A minus 17 in those very brief 14 minutes as well. But it just, getting that sample size has to inform something. And it's twofold, really, because the one thing that seems to be occurring here, so with Spencer Dinwiddie, we never said his trade value is going to be terribly high because of the type of player that he is in the contract. But Royce O'Neal, maybe a Dorian Finney-Smith, we're walking down this path here where what does it look like for value for these guys on the market? At a minimum, start elevating some other players. Maybe Lonnie Walker has value. Maybe Dennis Smith Jr. has value. I don't know what decisions this team wants to make, but at least mixing and matching and giving some different looks informs you, what do we have right now? Who do we want to keep around? Who are teams interested in? I know that this isn't the sexy conversation to have, but when you have lost as many games as the Nets have, this is what you're supposed to be in. Talent evaluation, and what are we going to look like after the trade deadline? It doesn't feel like they're fully there yet. And my concern here is they're going to come back from Paris. They're going to keep going with those same type of lineups, and nothing is going to look starkly different. And maybe even putting themselves into a corner where they're trying to convince themselves we need to add to what we have, as opposed to accepting that this team has a very clear ceiling that's being defined over the last 15 games.
Yeah, and I'm increasingly concerned that that we're just not going to see it. You know what I mean? Like just with the way things have gone. I mean, maybe not. Maybe it's just maybe we get back from Paris here and like we see Clowney and we see some of these other guys and the rotations. But then I don't know how you boost these guys' trade value, right? Like if the Dorian Finney-Smiths and the Royce O'Neals and the Spencer Dinwiddie's can't play for you, right? Or like they're not floor raising at all.
You and I aren't right about everything, Doug, but when we said specifically Royce O'Neal and Dorian Finney-Smith should have already been gone last year at the deadline or this past offseason, it only looks more, or even the beginning of this year, like you said, right? Trade Dorian Finney-Smith now when he's at an all-time high playing the starting lineup. It's never going to have been as valuable as it was at any other point, and it's probably true. I don't think teams are going to be banging down your door for these players because you see age and otherwise that the value is just diminishing. Year over year, it's diminished.
I think they'll like have some value. Like everyone has something, right? Like the contracts, the money's really low and they do provide something. It's just like I do believe like the days of the 2 first-round picks or whatever. I just don't see how that's even possible. I just don't think it's reality right now. Getting out with something, even late first, a second rounder or something. I still think they should do that because the Nets are just in this crunch now where they just have to have ways to get guys in. Honestly, too. They need to trade these guys for 2 reasons, and we can talk about this next time. They need to trade them, 1, to get the value, in my mind, 1 to get the value, but 2 to just not be blockers for the younger guys. Like it's a double problem here. Like they are reducing their value, and they're also blocking other guys maybe because that's who Vaughn wants to play, and so
that was
it's just a double problem.
Well, that was a clear conversation a couple episodes ago about why bring up the rookies and give them some run. It's not just because I think they're ready 100%, right? But because find out if you feel comfortable enough to not stunt their development, to not hurt them playing at the NBA versus playing at the G League level where things are easier, as we all know. It's so that can we make the decisions about Dorian Finney-Smith, Royce O'Neal, Spencer Dinwiddie, and say, okay, we're going to move into this different era of Brooklyn Nets basketball, but we're still going to be exciting. We're still going to be a little bit fun. And if you don't intend on moving on from Mikal Bridges or Cameron Johnson, as we don't suspect the Nets are, then you still need to have functional players around them. Like that's the other side of this, right? And why it's a little bit, I think, tricky for the organization in their mind to make these decisions, but why you and I think about it as being kind of easy and clear cut. Get rid of the old players, see what some of these young players have, and you still have value guys like a Dennis Smith Jr., like a Lonnie Walker, that if you want to let them expire this season because you want to keep them around Bridges and Claxton and Johnson, or maybe Claxton's gone too, so be it, right? But you can make marginal moves here, and this game just feels like it further highlights that this team needs to be making progressive decisions, and hopefully they do. I don't see it being likely, at least at this moment.
All right, we're going to get out of here. We're going to stick around here in YouTube for a little bit. Got a bunch of people asking questions. If you have a question, throw it at Locked On Nets. We'll try to get some questions before we get out the door. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe over on YouTube, where we're trying to get to 7,000 subscribers. Let's get us there. Let's get us there this season. I don't think it's going to be a problem, but just in case you're looking at that, make sure you hit subscribe. Subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts as well.
There is but one Paris, and however hard it may be living here, the French air clears up the brain and does one good. That's Vinny Van Gogh.
One of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow in a moment on YouTube talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball, yeah. When the post-game podcast ends, the post-pod podcast begins, circling up with you, the Brooklyn Nets fans, about the most recent game and also higher-level topics, such as tonight. Is it time for Jacques Vaughn to go as the Brooklyn Nets head coach? We dive in, coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends. It is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. And Doug, we dive in on the conversation. As we say, Brooklyn comes back from Paris, or will be coming back from Paris, fresh off a loss to the Cavs. They're trending towards the trade deadline. They're trending towards falling out of the play-in tournament. Is it finally time, when you look at this roster? I think we actually should frame it this way. When you look at this roster and the personnel on it, do you believe that Jacque Vaughn is a hindrance to maximizing the talent currently on this roster?
A hindrance? I don't know if he's a hindrance, but I don't think he's helping. I think it's just like the very definition of like neutral, right? I think there's probably some things that he does well. I think he's like a pretty cerebral guy. I think people like him. I think he's a calm influence. I think those things are pretty important, probably. In terms of like scheming and like we have said multiple times, like floor raising, right? Like getting the most out of guys. It's very clear that that's just not happening, right? Like it's very clear. They're not like X's and O'ing anybody out of the building at all. And it does look, I'm increasingly concerned, like the effort is low. Like we talked about this with Eric Slater yesterday, that the effort just doesn't look great. I mean, they've lost a ton of games. Like they are not an extremely talented team. They have enough talent to not have lost this many games, right? Yeah. Like this is really problematic. And so, I mean, like this is like trending. I mean, it's not trending toward Pistons territory, but it's been so bad here. And you can't fire the players, and maybe you should fire the coach. I don't really know, but I think let me put it, I'll finish this thought off with this. I think if he did not have a 3-year contract, he would already be gone. Like, I think that I do think that's probably pretty clear. I do wonder if the team is very hesitant to move on so quickly from another guy. Yeah. And that is probably more than anything saving the gig right now.
And it's the part of it that's hard for me, because I guess the reason why I framed it that way is to go back to the start of the season and say, hey, this is a team that won a lot in their bench margins. And so those performances obviously matter. But you get this idea. Remember, we talked about the over-under coming in the season. I mean, listen, it looks like they're going to fall a little bit short of my optimism. But the bottom line being, we still said, are they better than the 37.5 over-under that was set to start the year? Yeah, we believe so. Now, Ben Simmons, big factor, sure. That's not nothing to lose him out of whatever your process was going to be this season. But they were successful without Ben Simmons. They were winning basketball games without him. It just doesn't seem like Jacque Vaughn has that ability or willingness to make changes to get to the combinations that could maybe benefit these players individually more. Now, there's certain restrictions. You don't have as much ball handling as you probably need on this team, right? You don't have certain player archetypes to help accentuate. But at some point, I do have a hard time looking at these players, Mikal Bridges, Cameron Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, like Royce O'Neal, Cam Thomas, like all these guys in totality, and go, well, I think they're better than this. Like, they're better than the last 15 games. Maybe I'm wrong, but that does end up going up to me, back up the chain of command to Jacque Vaughn and saying the talent level is better than this, and you're not getting results for whatever reasons that may be.
Right. Like, okay, so like firing Jacque Vaughn wouldn't put a point guard on the team. Exactly. Right, like the team's desperate for a point guard right now, and for like even like above average point guard, average point guard play. And so firing Vaughn, whoever coach next would be dealt the same roster problem, which is they don't really have a point guard. It's like it's getting harder and harder to trust Dinwiddie. And after him, there's legit like not any point guards on the team. Like there'd be guys that could dribble the ball up the court, but they're not point guards by any stretch of the imagination. So they were relying on that probably too much on Simmons on that. That's been, a disaster. Yeah. And Dinwiddie, if he's just starting to tail off here, they 100% don't have another guy. They have other kind of guys like Dennis Smith Jr., but he's not really a traditional archetype. Cam Thomas definitely isn't. And after that, they just don't have that guy. And so you would still be having some of the same roster issues for sure. Maybe another coach could get more out of the guys. I'm not really positive about that. It stands to reason that someone else could. But yeah, they have other problems. Like it's not just this. This is clearly not the only problem. And I actually do wonder if that's, now that I said this part, I do wonder if that's the other thing that's saving the gig. It's like, we would be setting the next person up to fail too. right? Like
Right,
whoever got
yeah,
hired.
we don't want to move on from another coach again, but the next coach, we're going to move on from him too because the roster just is not constructed for
Exactly.
winning.
And I wonder if that's keeping him in place as much as anything else too. It's like, well, what am I going to do? Promote the next guy like Kevin Ollie, Ryan Burrell? Those guys are going to be having the same problems. Maybe they get slightly better, right? But they're still going to be dealt the same core issues that the Nets have, which is they have no superstar talent, anything close, and they have a weird combination of guys that aren't all complementary. And point guard being one of them, but there's other examples.
And we talked about this before, but it's kind of why I feel like Jacque Vaughn and the Mikal Bridges, Cameron Johnson, let's call it era of the Brooklyn Nets, it feels like they're tied together. Because to move on to your point, it's like to move on from Jacque Vaughn would be to say, well, someone else is going to do better, but it's probably going to look similar because the roster is the same. To not move on from Mikal Bridges and Cameron Johnson is to say, well, we got these guys in the Kevin Durant trade. We can't part with them, but we don't want to spend the draft capital to bring in another player to elevate the quality of their game. Like all this stuff gets lumped together and it goes, this is what it is. And if you look at contracts and where things line up, you go, maybe that's just the timeline that Brooklyn is willing to ride here, where whatever the results are going to be for better or worse, we're not going to put it on to the next generation of players or put it on to the next version of our coaching staff, which is a little bit interesting if you think about what Brooklyn is or is not going to do when it comes to the deadline. We can get to that a little bit more here in just 1 second. We'll also take a look at some of your questions, obviously, as some people they're enjoying the discussion around Jacque Vaughn here, Doug. We'll get back into that in just 1 second.
All right, one more reminder about our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks Daily Fantasy made so easy. All you're doing on Prize Picks, you're going over there, you're going more or less on the Prize Picks projections. You're not going against sharks in the water. You're not going against these people that are putting a million lineups. No, it's just you versus the Prize Picks projections for the NBA: points, rebounds, blocks, steals, assists, NFL, rushing yards, receiving yards, catches. It's all touchdowns, everything you love about fantasy with the numbers. Prize Picks put it all there for you. Made it really easy to pick your players, go more or less on their projections, win up to 25 times your money as well. All you have to do right now is go to prizepicks.com/lockedonnba. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA, grab a first deposit match up to $100. prizepicks.com/lockedonnba, code LOCKEDONNBA. First deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy.
All right, so as we continue the pod, I will just quickly throw up this one here. Anybody at Locked On Nets? I just enjoy this. I think that, John comes in, frequent flyer. It's like watching watching Doug and Adam criticize the coaching squad is like a fun, low budget film. Keep it going.
Can I say one thing about that? I am often the slowest, and sometimes not good, and sometimes I think correctly, to criticize coaching because I think that the things that people often criticize coaching is wrong. Like, this is not what Jonathan's saying.
Bad process, good result, though, when we talk about how people criticize maybe a coach early when in reality.
Okay, well, so put it this way: coaches will almost always get blamed for a loss and never get credited with a win. Okay, so that's like where it starts. Also, people just choose like sort of the most myopic things. Like he called a timeout in the wrong place. Like that's just not a reflection of coaching. Sorry, It's just not. It's so low on the list as to be sort of laughable to me if like that's what you're evaluating. But it highlights that people often don't know what to evaluate when they look at coaching, right? So like they don't know. They just don't know. And so this is not Jacque Vaughn related. It's just coaching related. Like you don't know, who's, because every coaching staff has someone in charge of the offense, someone in charge of the defense, right? Like assistant coaches, they have assistant coaches that work specifically with players, right? Like, they get sectioned off by the development coaches, work with certain, like every staff has guys that work with players, right? And it's like, and it's very segmented. Like there's a whole structure. There's so many things going on in terms of coaching that often I think people are too quick to call for a coach's head without a full understanding of what's happening. Now but me viewing it that way will always make me late to a coach should be let go to thing.
Right.
And maybe we are past that point now, but I'm just saying for my own thing, like I'm never going to be, oh, he didn't call a timeout, fire him. Cause like you should never, like, that's a very silly statement. Now I do think we have a body of work here that is pointing that direction, but I guess I'm just pointing to my own internal thing. Like I think the average NBA fan significantly to criminally underrates what goes into coaching to the point where they have no idea. You would walk in there, you'd be lost. Like you'd have no idea what's going on there. And I often think the people, this is going to sound bad, the people that criticize, that want the coach fired the fastest, often know the least. Like that's just that's my opinion. Maybe that hits people the wrong way. I don't know.
No. I was about to make the joke. Do I think I could coach a couple NBA games? Listen, I have a few ideas about what would work or not work. Yeah, of course. Right.
You can stand there.
The actions, the off ball, the off ball decisions that are getting made on the court. Those are things that even after watching every single game, every single year for 5+ seasons, there's still times when we go back and you rewatch plays time and again to pick up on everything that's occurring there. So sometimes it can be a little bit easy. I'll piggyback off of that around something else. And I wonder if you would agree about this as well in terms of the Brooklyn Nets. You say about, when it's time to move on from Jacque Vaughn. Okay. But I also wonder if, like, I have of late, even though I like almost all of these players individually, of late, I've become more and more of the mind that when we talk about the deadline or talk about this team this season, at what point are we going to say, will we be late to the party about the Brooklyn Nets should be trading Mikal Bridges, should be trading Cameron Johnson, should be getting all the draft capital they can, and just understanding what it is? Because we're not going to do the rebuild. We want to be competitive. We want to make the playoffs. Well, guess what? We're watching that goal slip away here. So once you get to the point where the reason you have this version of this team is to accomplish goal X and Y and Z, and you're not going to hit any of those marks most likely, then you have to pivot into how do we maximize value? We talk about these bench players, Dorian Finney-Smith or Royce O'Neal, and maximizing their value in the trade, and they're probably diminished a little bit. There's a world where you are overexposing what some of the deficiencies are in Cam Johnson's game, in Mikal Bridges' game. I'm not saying it's ever going to dumpster their value, but they're not going to be worth. I don't think Mikal Bridges will ever be worth the 4 first-round picks that were rumored to be offered from Memphis a year ago at the deadline. Doesn't mean I was a proponent of trading him at that time. I wasn't. But now as we move forward, what is it going to look like another year now, another 2 years from now? If they're not going to win basketball games, I do think you have to approach the team overall in a different way. Like you have to approach the value of these players far differently if they're going to be a 10 game under 500 team, excuse me.
Yeah, my guess is something like they probably understand that with Bridges, and they're hoping that he could be like the second or third best player in a team once they're able to acquire other guys like Donovan Mitchell. I'm just saying the names here, but like Donovan Mitchell, or if like a real superstar sprung loose and they were able to kind of put something together for that guy, right? Like I think they probably see him because like I would still only advocate trading Bridges for like back for the Houston picks and nowhere else, because I do think like he fits. He's probably overexposed as a number 1, but I'd love for him to be the 2 or 3 still, right? Like,
for sure.
I mean, in terms of pecking order, not position. But in terms of like being early on selling off the rest of the pieces, I'm all for that. We've been early on that one. We've said, like we just said it 2 minutes ago about trading these guys now because they just have to be restocking too. And if they're just going to be bad anyway, at that point, the Houston picks are the Houston picks. You have to live with it, and they have to get the money. Again, they're still in a tough place here because the Simmons contract still remains an absolute just disaster, and it's $42 million of zero basketball. But so they're still not like they can't do the old thing after the Boston debacle where they took on all this bad money and got assets attached, right? It's like you take on Mozgov, you take on D'Lo, like you get stuff attached to it, and you kind of rebuild that way. They can't do that now because the Simmons contract is the bad money. They already have the bad money. Right? They've already taken the bad
money. Just we did it in the wrong order. We've got the bad money.
Right. They took it on. He's been the worst contract in basketball. So anyway, and actually I want to throw up a comment here real quick about just going back to Vaughn because it highlights the thing I just said. Is he says even if you fired Vaughn, JV, who do we even get? No coaches are available. So this is a good point too, right? It's like if you fire him midseason, I'm actually mostly attached to the thing we talked about earlier, which is you don't fire him because you're setting the next person up to just do the same bad job. Right. And so I do wonder if this is it too. Like, even if you had identified Kevin Ollie, let's say I'm making this name up, but I mean, I'm not making him, he's on the staff, but let's say you identified Ollie as like the next coach, right? There's no chance you would ever put him in the position now because he's just going to lose too. Right. Like they don't have enough talent. You wait and bide your time and maybe have Vaughn play the string out here. He ends up looking bad because of it, but it's even worse to hire a new coach to look bad also because the talent isn't there.
Yeah, and whoever it is, and now the Atlanta Hawks did this, in the midseason and gave Quinn Snyder an opportunity to come in and assess and reevaluate and decide where you want to go from there. But just to this
But
comment point
but
too.
he was there. Like the one difference. Sorry to interrupt you, but like
No, no.
that guy, the Snyder type is actually not out there right now.
No, that's what I mean.
Right?
Yeah, he was available to be brought
He was
in 100%.
available. Him, Vogel, like some of these guys were out there as like because they had taken gap years. But who's out there now? Like Doc Rivers. I don't think you don't want to do that. And he's not gonna. He wouldn't take this gig anyway. But I'm just pointing out guys that are in the coaching carousel. Those guys really, unless I'm just missing somebody, I don't think that type of guy is sitting out there right now.
No, I'm sure. Yeah, maybe I could go scrape and find coaches you would think about, or even the idea. I think it's too. Say it's even worse to say it this way. Say the Brooklyn Nets, as you said, believe in Kevin Ollie in the grand scheme of things, right? Or Burrell, they believe in him in the grand scheme of things. I don't want to give him half a bad year because then you create the same perception wheel that's going on with Jacque Vaughn right now. Well, if he's not the guy, you got to move on from him. So you may actually undercut any coaching value that you have internally by putting them there as well, as you're saying, setting them up for failure too. The only thing I'll just tie back into on the Bridges thing, again, I want to be very clear. I like these players. I'm happy to have them here. I'll be happy if they stayed here. I have, though, changed my mind about pick value. Houston is not the only trade that I would make. If a team wants to give me 3 first-round picks and maybe a young player, et cetera, for Mikal Bridges, I at least am having that conversation. I'm at least thinking about it internally. What does that mean for us? Because by the way, the trickle-down effect there is, then obviously you have discussions about Cameron Johnson. Does somebody want to give us value for him? If you turned around after this deadline, and we'll do a deeper dive on this stuff as we get closer, if you turned around, though, and said, in addition to all the Phoenix picks, in addition to all the Dallas picks and some things from 76ers, we brought in another 6 first-round picks from various teams and trades and moves, I think you have to be open to that just because it means keep firing shots, keep taking your chances, and you still have capital to go get that superstar, because the difference here is while Mikal might be the perfect 2 or 3, as you said, in the pecking order behind a superstar, you also can find other guys that can be really good 2s and 3s in a pecking order. The thing you can't just go find with ease is the superstar. So you can always go trade for the superstar, and then you can find the pieces that make sense around them. I think that has to at least be a viable option, or should be. I don't think that it is for Brooklyn, but I'm open to that.
I'll do like a half pushback on that too. It's just that let's say you traded Bridges to like OKC, right? Let's say OKC's got all these picks, like a 5,000 picks. I don't think this is going to happen, but let's just say, right? You trade OKC Bridges and they give you like a ton of picks. Mm-hmm. If they're their picks, those picks are going to be second rounders from now till infinity, right? Because that team's going to be good forever. They're young. And so you're basically just trading for a bunch of very, very late first rounders. This is why this is my new cause, is advocating renaming these picks into what they actually are. They all get, this is my new crusade. My new crusade is renaming picks into the actual thing. They all get called first rounders.
Not so first round pick.
It's lottery projected or end of first round. Like, we have to start labeling them, because when you say, hey, they got 25 first round, 10 first round picks from OKC, great. That's going to be pick 30 every year, right? Like, it's just because they're going to be great every year from now till like the picks run out. If we traded for Charlotte's first round picks, I mean, they're not going to do that, but I'm going to think differently about that, because that team could stink forever. And so, you know what I mean? Like, just like calling them first round picks is a misnomer to me. By the way, I don't know what this comment was about. But I agree.
Yeah.
Right.
All I know for sure is he must be 100% right. Well, and see, my other, when I think about being willing to trade any of these guys for any number of picks with a clear, obviously, threshold, right? We're not talking about, hey, a first round pick for Mikal Bridges, thanks so much. But being open to those opportunities is because I live on either end of the spectrum now. Either start to think about trading these guys for reasonable packages, first round picks, and set yourself up to take a lot of shots, or go get whoever the superstar is, whatever the player is. Like we talked about Donovan Mitchell. He's not necessarily the right guy, doesn't make you a contender. I don't know. Then go trade for him, though. Because not trading for him and keeping these picks, but also not trading Mikal Bridges and having a team that's losing a ton of basketball games and looks like in the short term over the next couple of years is going to be a 500 or substantially below type of roster. What are we doing? Like, the idea of like, you don't control your own picks, so you don't want to end up being dumpstered. And they're doing it. It's already happening. They're just doing it in a different way, where the product on the players on the court, by name recognition and in theory by talent level, make you think, well, this isn't a rebuild. It is a rebuild. They're just trying to give you something that's like a little bit engaging while they're doing the rebuild, right? So I understand that can be like the process from a pure business standpoint. If you're the Brooklyn Nets, I would advocate that if you're the Brooklyn Nets, it's okay. We all get the ruse here. You can just do the full thing, and you'll probably be appreciated for it more in the short term than selling this bill of goods. Because again, we said this time and time again, they're not going to do the thing one way or the other. They're not going to satisfy any part of the fan base when it comes to the deadline. They're going to do the exact wrong thing. Maybe trade Royce O'Neal, still keep Dorian Finney-Smith, and just end up with this weird roster for the back half of the season. It's going to be a mess.
All right, a couple more things. Al Mack here, frequent flyer, said Memphis picks weren't valuable, but anything can happen. I agree with this. I agree. Anything can happen.
Right.
A meteor could hit Houston and we get all the picks back because, the team blew up. I'm talking probabilistically, because you have to evaluate the probability. Every organization has, I'm sure, because they have this in the NFL. So I'm sure that NBA teams have this also, which is just like a value chart based on trying to evaluate what picks are actually going to be worth later. Like they understand
organizational, who are their talent, where are they projected to be in 5 years?
Who do they have under contract? Like how, how likely is it, who their coach is? Like they have some way to evaluate. Now, sometimes you can have, a guy gets suspended for 25 games and then tears labrum and then Marcus Smart gets his finger cut off or whatever. And all of a sudden the season's over. That can happen. It's extremely unlikely though, is more my point, right? It's like, it can happen. It's unlikely. So I guess mostly just trying to say probabilistically, you want to just
again, which I think is good to bring up. Actually, we can hit this one too from Jean-Claude.
Yeah, sorry. The next comment was, you're firing Vaughn to get some of the young guys the opportunities you've been asking for. Firing Vaughn will expedite the changes you've been wondering about. I agree with this, except that if this is what they want to do, they should just organizationally have an edict to say, go play the young guys. Just tell Vaughn,
preventing you from this. If that's
exactly if this is what you want to do as an organization, it actually shouldn't take firing the coach to do that. So,
which is why I secretly don't think this is what the Nets want to do or intend to do. Because I don't think Vaughn is the guy standing between Sean Marks and the organization and what they want to accomplish.
I think there's probably some disagreements around some rotations. Would be my strong suspicion.
Right.
But in terms of if they wanted the guys playing, the guys would play or at least be there. So I don't think it's all that. And I don't think you should have to. You're a bad organization if you have to fire the coach because he's not doing it. But it's the Clowney and those guys weren't even with the team. They're on the 2-way. So if they're not even with the team, that's not a coaching thing. The coach doesn't move the guys, shuttle the guys back and forth to the G League. That's the GM and the assistant GMs do that.
Right,
so
right.
it's that's not a coaching thing.
I will, as you pull up any other ones before we start to wrap ourselves up here on it's a Thursday evening. I will just on you're talking about the probability of and making those kind of decisions.
I brought up the wrong one. Both related.
It was good though. It was a good one. I like that your bonus podcast that your eyes just got wide. I was like, that was alarming. I wonder what happened there. Just quickly before we talk about the Cam Johnson comment. On the probability of things, which I agree with you, right? The probability that picks from OKC or Team XY for Mikal Bridges are ever going to turn into high-level value, lottery projected picks, is lower than others. But the one thing that is highly probable is that this team, as currently constituted, is not going to win anything, right? So I think you also have to be weighing the own probability of your organizational and team success as currently constituted relative to taking depreciated first-round assets versus high-leverage ones, et cetera. I think it all goes into that bag, and I'm sure that hopefully the organization is doing that. The media can't protect Cam Johnson forever. Well, he hasn't been protected from us because we again believed in him in the trade, thought the contract was fine. It's the money and there's bonuses that he'll never probably get to. It's all good, but we've already said going back a month now, maybe more than that, Cameron Johnson is just kind of a nice player, kind of fits on a team, and that's kind of what he is. And that's another reason why you could argue that maybe that's a little bit of a misstep here in not making different decisions leading up to this, because you are left with, clearly, if you told me that he was coming off the bench for the Brooklyn Nets right now, that wouldn't even seem egregious on this currently constituted roster. I don't know if he's deserving of being one of the cemented starters for this team. He probably is not.
Yeah, we don't talk about him because there's nothing to talk about. It's just not, it's not horrendous, right. And there's not horrendous and it's not good. Just a guy. Just when it comes to NBA basketball, just a guy. Seems like an incredibly nice guy. I'm really rooting for him. Seems like a great dude to have as part of your organization, 100%. Really thoughtful, thinks about basketball a ton. The Old Man in the 3 episode with him was amazing. He's just a really thoughtful dude. We don't talk about him because there's just not a ton to love and there's not a ton to hate. It's just kind of I don't know. We got a lot of money and it's been about what we should have predicted it would be.
About that.
Right.
It's been about that. Jonathan here with, okay, you can hold my question for the next show. I saw your question, Johnny, but we actually are going to
No, I wrote it. I wrote to him in chat. I wrote to him above it. I said, we're going to talk about this exact question for the next show. That's why I didn't bring it up.
Oh, there it is. Okay, perfect. There you go.
But he was asking about DeJounte Murray and some like Dean Wade's kind of Cavs stuff. And DeJounte Murray is like legit what we're doing for the next episode. So that's the only reason we weren't avoiding that one. I just didn't want to get into that topic. We didn't want to get into the topic here because it's like the title of our next episode.
And frankly, John, stay out of our pre-show meeting. Okay. Like we put together carefully crafted content, stay out of there. No, I really appreciate it. Anybody else we want to get to here before we wrap it
up? Probably, but I think we need to probably wrap this up here.
Come back in next week, right?
Yeah, we'll be back next week. We might do a bonus one over the weekend, depending on where the DeJounte Murray stuff, like if there's any real fire to that smoke. I don't think there is, but I think it's an interesting spot to like sort of look at where the team is going because Jake Fisher reported about DeJounte Murray. So we do want to talk about that, but that's really just like a whole podcast episode. The Nets play again on Monday, so get ready. We'll probably do the DeJounte Murray stuff for Monday's episode. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe over on YouTube. Much appreciate everyone that jumped in here at YouTube Live. Want to try to get to every question, but there's a ton here, and we do have some time limit. So make sure you subscribe. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast as well.
Speaking of smoke, love is a smoke made with the fume of sighs. Why, that's Bill Shakespeare.
Oh, one of the all-time great collection of writers that all made up the one guy that was named William Shakespeare. One of the all-time great poets.
Did a great job.
Conspiracy. One of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again Monday talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.